Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to our expert panel, Building Trust in AI, Data Governance and Data Management for Generative AI, brought to you by our friends at Orlando Insight Group and Skyflow. I'm Brian Mink, co-founder and president of Data Science Connect, the world's largest data and AI community. Today, we're excited to welcome hundreds of attendees from all over the world for this critical conversation on data management and governance, the foundation for trustworthy AI. AI is only as strong as the data that powers it. Without robust governance and management, AI systems can become unreliable, biased, and even non-compliant with emerging regulations. The key? Ensuring data quality, integrity, and security at scale. Today, we'll dive into building trustworthy AI systems, practical strategies for data integrity, and how to implement governance frameworks without stifling progress. We're honored to hear from a distinguished panel of experts today. Amber Eshelman, Senior Director of Global Data Governance at ADP, and Henry Clavo, founder of Orlando Insight Group. Unfortunately, our final panelist, Marcy Cunningham at IHG, was unable to join due to a family emergency, so we wish her all the best. Before we begin, a few final housekeeping items. To make this feel a little more in person, we suggest you add a photo to your profile and include your bio, LinkedIn profile, and other information you want your fellow attendees to see. Next, please take advantage of the Q&A and chat features throughout this webinar. We'll be addressing your questions throughout the webinar, so please be sure to upvote the questions you'd like the panel to address. And finally, to learn more about the importance of data governance and data management in your AI journey, check out the calls to action below throughout the webinar from our sponsors, Orlando Insight Group and Skyflow. Now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Amber and Henry to the stage. Welcome, Amber. Welcome, Henry.
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Hello.
Thanks for joining us today. Looking forward to a great conversation. So before we get into the substance, just wanted to start with some quick intros. So if you guys could take a moment to introduce yourself, tell us about your experience in your current role and your familiarity with the topics today.
Hi, I'm Henry Clavo, founder of Orlando Insight Group, offering data consultancy services in risk management, hypercloud implementations, and data. And I've been involved with many clients that have issues with their enterprise data management, and we provide expertise in solving their scalability issues and data lineage problems. So, and I've been in the field for 10 years and looking to help customers with that process.
Excellent. Welcome, Henry. Amber?
Yeah, Amber Eshelman. I'm the Senior Director of Data and AI Governance at ADP. And I've been in this field for the last 5 or 6 years, but with this company for almost 20. So well versed in the data and, just the amount of data and the importance of data integrity, data sensitivity, and protecting data privacy with the data sets that we have at ADP. So happy to be here and talk about AI.
Excellent. Thank you both for the intros. So before we get into some of the details of the topics today, I just want to start with a quick overview and intro for some of the core concepts that'll be fundamental to our conversation. So first, if you both could spend a moment discussing data governance and data management, two distinct but related concepts, specifically in the context of AI. So just kind of define those for the audience and how they're specifically impactful now in the context of AI. Why don't we start with you on that one, Amber?
Sure. Gosh, they're really closely related. The way I like to think of it is data management is the operationalization of data governance policies and principles, best practices. So data governance kind of defines the rules for data management to follow when they're handling data, they're collecting it, they're accessing it, storing it, processing it, et cetera. So they're following those best practices, policies, and principles that data governance has set forth. But when it comes to AI, I think governance is slightly different. It's no longer just structured data. It's no longer just primarily data at rest. You have to define like your risk points, how to implement proper controls at those risk points, and risk for AI. And that's probably the most important thing you can do is define what risk for AI looks like at your organization, because it's much different than the traditional data uses. So I think that's where it differs in terms of like it's not your traditional data governance program that you'd be running. We're talking about data that's in flight and moving, going to a language model and then coming back. And how do you protect all of that data in transit as well? So certainly I would say the way you use AI is where you need to kind of button down where your risk points are.
Yeah, great overview, Amber. Henry, what are your thoughts on data governance and data management in the context of AI?
Essentially, data governance is just a framework. It's the rules that enforces accountability in the management of data and the responsibilities and roles. And data management's essentially encapsulates all the data with all the information stored and structured in a lifecycle that organizations and data scientists and analysts can access. With the context of AI, we can use models to train based on the information within the database systems and automate that process and extract all the information without coding or no code solutions. And with the data governance framework, it's a lot easier now with Databricks, Elation, and Calibra, where you can essentially query and have a conversation with your model and learn more about policies and solutions to make your organizations impactful and knowledgeable.
Yeah, great overview, Henry. So I think one of the first questions that we hear from a lot of folks in our space is that they almost don't know where to begin on AI. There's so much that they feel there's so much opportunity, there's so many potential challenges. And so specifically in the data governance context, what are the first steps that organizations should take when they're thinking about revisiting their data governance frameworks in light of AI? What is kind of the first initial steps they should take in figuring that out? Henry, why don't you start with that one?
Essentially, what they're going to use their data for? Are they going to do text generation? What does the output will look like? So breaking it down by structure, it will help us align with the customers what they want to work with the data, as well as depending on, let's say, if it's healthcare, financial services, that's where the policies and protections of the data in the data governance framework will take place. And from there on, how can we implement that model in a production database that protects that information from information coming in and coming out? And that would be observability information data. But it all starts at the beginning with officers, data stewards, AI analysts to be able to work together and define those strategies.
Yeah, great points. It all starts with the people ultimately, and the policies are also an important part of that. Amber, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, my first reaction is do a lot of reading. And I say that because I say look to your outside leaders and controls. NIST has an AI framework. ISO has AI certification that is now available for organizations. There's laws and regulations that are being established across the globe, such as the EU AI Act, which is, I would probably say if you're going to build a global program, like start with the strictest and work down, right? So the resources, they provide an excellent framework for organizations to follow to build a program from. You don't have to invent it. And that's the beauty of looking at all these different leaders and controls and trying to aggregate and identify what's the gaps in your own program, and then trying to solve for those gaps to make sure you have a complete, comprehensive, robust program. The second thing I would recommend is to think about how AI is used by your business. And I think Henry touched on this quite a bit, so I won't go too deep. But some people have clients, some people have employees. There's points of vulnerability in all of those. So, looking at the specific risk of AI to your organization and what you need to guard against is really important. One thing that I also recommend, and I think it's a great point of, it's just not even just a point of reference, a guiding light, is an AI ethics council. And I think those folks really drive like what's acceptable risk, what's unacceptable risk, in addition to obviously like the EU AI Act has unacceptable risk that they've defined as well. But as a business, what are you guys comfortable with and what are you not comfortable with doing with AI? And I think it's really important to establish those guardrails and guidelines up front. So the AI ethics council is a great thing to have in place as well.
Yeah, those are great points. And we have a comment in the chat that I want to get your reaction to, because I think it's an interesting point. Mohammed says, simply data governance is AI insurance policy. And I think that's certainly, one component of why data governance is important is for those worst case scenarios. But can you guys also speak to some other situations in addition to just being an insurance policy or being something that sort of covers you in a worst case scenario and prevents really bad things from happening? What are some other ways that data governance is important in AI and for organizations to think about proactively?
Look, if you don't garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have good data quality, you're not going to have effective model recommendations, predictability, et cetera. So absolutely, is it a good protection and control device? 100%. And me being in protections and controls, I fully embrace that statement. At the same time, I would say like it's a huge enabler. And I think that's the big thing that you have to kind of flip the script when you're in a business, is to think about how do we enable others, and we aren't seen as like red tape or blockers to innovation or success. And that's a tricky conversation, and it's not as easy to have as you think. But I would say, like, think about how also these activities that you're doing become enablers to better outcomes. And I think data quality plays a big role there. So that would be my like gut first reaction to that question.
Yeah, great point. And Henry?
Yeah, I was going to say data governance is AI insurance policy, but for who? If you notice the news, Facebook plays data in other regions that are not compliant with the GDPR. So it's incumbent that companies use the AI ethics guidelines to communicate with consumers, customers, to be able to communicate where their data is being collected and what's being shared, and what the initiatives are doing within companies. But that's kind of rare. But going back, having that framework protects the company from risk, as well as the protection of policies. And a good example is insurance and financial, because there are heavily regulated industries, so they have to follow the rules, and they will get fined huge amounts of money. So that is incumbent from the CEO to integrate these policies, ensuring that all teams are removed from silos and start working together to be able to reduce that liability.
Yeah, those are great points. And the topic of our webinar today is building trust in AI. So I think data governance and data management are critical to helping build that trust, even outside of, obviously, one really bad incident can kill all trust. But there's a lot of things you can do leading up to that to give people, whether it's your internal stakeholders, external stakeholders, customers, that trust and that belief that your organization values doing the right thing when it comes to data, and that you have thought about this and are implementing AI in a way that's responsible. So I think that's very good points all around. Getting to our next question, how organizations can strike a balance between innovation and regulatory compliance, particularly in highly regulated industries, but really across the board. How do you balance those two things of needing to move fast and innovate while also complying with regulations and doing so responsibly? Henry, why don't you start with that one?
I will answer this question, but with the examples that I've seen in Europe, I cannot talk about from personal experience, but in Europe, startups are having a hard time being able to use a lot of models and be able to compensate for that solution. So it's very heavily regulated without no investments in their industry, compared to the United States, where there's so during the previous U.S. administration, they were able to do surveys, conduct information AIs and initiatives, but nothing regulatory that prevents companies and startups to be able to use the models, use proprietary information. So there's no limit on that. So that is, yeah.
Amber?
Yeah, gosh, I mean, my first reaction is a lot of people think innovation speed and compliance slow, right? And so I think the most important thing here is to decouple that assumption. That is an organic thing that we all make. But it's important to understand that compliance doesn't have to mean slow. It doesn't have to mean red tape, because it's all about how you build your infrastructure. If you use if you build your systems and your products with a security by design or compliance by design or privacy by design perspective, what you're doing is embedding that organically into your flow of data usage, data security programs, et cetera. So everyone's thinking about it all the time because it's built into their ways of work. And it's really important because AI is changing every day. It morphs, like, from yesterday to today. There's new threats, there's new advancements, there's new models out there in the market to achieve new goals. And so it's really, really cool. But then also when you think about controls, it's like, how do I keep up? How do I keep up? How do I keep up? And I think it's easier to implement frameworks. It's easier to implement changes when the framework's already there. So again, security by design, privacy by design, all of those things are, like, I think, crucial to being able to be more nimble and adjust to compliance and innovation. It's not easy to navigate, but in my experience, that has been the best way to kind of accelerate while being safe.
Yeah, that's a great point, Amber. And I think importance of framing it as these things are not in conflict, they can work together. And especially as organizations, I think right now in 2025, for a lot of organizations, they're trying to figure out, how do we take what we did in a proof of concept or a prototype or at a very small rollout in production and spread that across our organization? How do we do AI at scale? And so if you haven't built for that, then you're going to have to figure that out. You're going to have to, right? From a data governance standpoint, how to do that at scale across a large organization. And so you are better off if you're proactive and thinking about these issues up front, and you're partnering with data governance teams, data management, you're getting the right solutions in place, so that as you start to do these things at scale, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and things will scale much easier from proof of concept to production if you have some fundamental data governance frameworks in place. So you mentioned, Amber, a few minutes ago, of course, garbage in, garbage out, and data quality and provenance are always important issues with data, but even more so as we figure out how to build trustworthy AI. So how can organizations help to do that in the age of AI? How do you ensure integrity in your data pipelines? What are some practical steps? Why don't you start there, Amber?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think Henry hit on it a little bit earlier. There's a combination of things at play here, right? You've got to have the right tools in place so that you can set up data quality rules, you can monitor, and you can make sure that you have alerts when things start to go askew. On the flip side, you've got to have data stewards, you've got to have the right infrastructure, you've got to have this be part of your culture at work. So I would say, a lot of folks can either do a centralized organization or they can do a hub and spoke model. There's a lot of ways to kind of tackle this, but what's most important is that you have a set of tools that you can set up data quality rules in. You can say, these are our thresholds. This is where we say, hey, we may have a problem with this data element or these collection of data elements. Your data stewards that are embedded about the business, trained, and they know how to use the tools and go in and affect change and clean things up. Those data stewards identified throughout the organization, which is part of your data governance framework, are a key player in this, and keeping the pulse of on your data health and making sure that you know and also I would say be selective about what you monitor. You can't monitor everything. So that's another like kind of thing where you kind of have to step back and say, like, what's important to us, and so you wouldn't want to just slap a bunch of rules on everything, because then if everything's important, nothing's important, right? So I guess a big tip I would say there is that, like, really dig in and say, like, what is important, and it could be use case by use case. It could be what's important to us as a business, as a company, and those two things can coexist. But I would say you got to dig in. You got to get the participation from our subject matter experts that live in the business, understand the operations, understand how that data is supposed to look, how it's supposed to come in, and monitor for changes that are anomalies in that data. On the flip side, you've got to have excellent policies and standards to guide those folks and know when to activate them and keep that balance going. So, again, ultimately it's about setting up the data quality framework, identifying the data stewards, and then just configuring the tools to manage the appropriate data quality concerns that you have at your business or with your particular use case. So that's kind of, in my opinion, how you would kind of approach a data quality management program.
Excellent points. Henry?
Yeah, I agree with everything Amber said, and especially there's organizations that are not prepared for that. So we come in, we modernize their tech stack, we implement it with the age of data quality tools like Databricks, Elation, and Calibra. We can just log in, map the metadata, the compliance, the user information, role-based, implement and migrate it to a technologies and be able to provide access. But that's not the end of the story. We need to train. We also need to follow with stakeholders to be invested in this program in order for them to understand that we're not working in silo, but we're working together toward a common goal. So that's usually what I see with customers. They're still in the trenches, but slowly but surely we are helping them modernize to use these tools as the first step, and then provide subject matter experts, especially in my companies, to come and show them what does a data governance program look like, and what is your responsibility, as opposed to high-level interactions.
Yeah, great points. I want to jump to another question that we have in the chat from Ray. Ray says, hello from Albany, New York. I would like to understand better how to protect sensitive data that should not be released from being consumed by AI training models. And I would also frame that, from a data governance standpoint, if you've got multiple teams, there may be data that lives in places you don't even know what that data is, right? And it's being picked up potentially in an AI training model. So how do you sort of wall off that sensitive data? What are some best practices around that? Henry, you want to start with that?
Yeah. If you're migrating your data to cloud environments already protected, it's all the security role bases already determined. And I would recommend using local-based LLM models, so you don't feed to an API that takes sensitive information. But the key idea here is you have to make sure that your data doesn't leave the protected environment. And then when you ship that information off to SageMaker, Hugging Face, you have to understand the ramifications of doing that. So it's always best practices to do it locally, making sure you have access to that framework and have all your training data within a repository protected inside the organization.
Great points. Amber, you want to add anything there?
Yeah. Look, like I would say, don't ever let any large language model use your data to train. And they will make that agreement with you, and you can enforce that. So that is definitely something that I would highly recommend. They likely don't even need it, if I'm being honest. And so at this point, they've aggregated enough information to have a highly effective model. Or if they don't, you can find another model that doesn't have your information in it. In addition to that, Henry hit on a couple of important points too. So I'll kind of highlight maybe a couple things in addition to that. I think that, you got to have strong DLP practices. So if you think about data leaving and going to a large language model, agree with Henry, like keep it all on site. You shouldn't be like sending things out of your network, etc. There's a lot of great security architecture recommendations around that. But I would also say that you can build custom scanners. You can buy scanners from products that do this today, that focus in on basically stripping out that sensitive data and making sure that it doesn't leave to go to a large language model. So you can put some sensitive data firewall scanners in, both going into a large language model and then the response coming out of the large language model. So I highly recommend a two-way scanning system there. As well as if you're going to use any third-party model or data set, you should be scanning those for security threats before you bring them into your environment. Or if you need to bring them in to do so, it's in a very isolated kind of air gap style situation. So I would say important for you to make sure that you're not inserting threats and risk into your environment with third-party tools that you don't know anything about. And so I think, there's a lot of tools out there that can help you ensure that you protect your sensitive data and that you also don't, unknowingly insert risk into your environment. And those are really important to get in place and get tested, and are just an extra. I always say security is not just a one-shot deal. You've got to have layered security. It gets past the first one, it doesn't get past the second one. It gets past the first and second, it can't get past the third, right? So you've really got to look at that. The other thing that I would just call out real quick is a lot of this is in your prompt engineering or how your developers are developing their systems. And it is their responsibility as well to tokenize or remove that information before it's being sent to the LLM. So if you think about it that way, developers are doing their job. You put some firewalls in to double check going out and coming back in, and then they can add that tokenization data back to it to make it a more valuable data set. Then you really don't, you have a few layers of security there, and even if one is broken, the other one should catch it. So I like to layer my security. And so that would be my recommendation, to protect sensitive data.
Yeah, excellent points, Amber. And we've got a couple of questions that are hitting on the same topic here. One is from Lorenzo, so I'll use his, but similar point made by Mel in the chat above. How do you bring the culture of data in a company that has no data expertise at all? How do you make different teams that are focused on business as usual understand the importance of data quality and data-driven decisions? And I would also say, adding to that, data governance and AI literacy specifically. So, a lot of the things you just mentioned, Amber, about best practices for preventing threats from being brought into your environment, that relies in part on effective tools and effective infrastructure and policies, but also in part relies on your people being trained to know what are potential threats, what are best practices, what are things I need to avoid or I need to get permission on before I do them. So just speak to that about how do you educate people on some of these best practices and ensure that you've got this culture of data governance as your organization is doing more and more ambitious things with AI.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think like it's easy for people not to get data governance because it's technical and it's business, right? And the technical side, people just kind of glaze over and look at you like, what are you talking about? But it's really, really important that you can translate business problems. We can solve the technical needs on the back end, right? Tell me what you are and are not allowed to do in France. Tell me what you are and are not allowed to do in Germany. Are there different regulations and rules that I have to follow? Then we can go back and build those custom scanners and do those things and say, hey, we think we've fixed this challenge for you, and now we've enabled this product, and now you can use this product over there because we've set up security guardrails that will allow you to do this safely. So I think you really have to get at the heart of like, what is the business problem that's being solved? What are the risks that come along with that business problem? How can your team come in and help resolve those risks? I guarantee you, 9 times out of 10, you sit down with a business operations team and they go, data quality, like, this is just such a challenge for me. And they talk about how they just can't get the data quality right. And they may not use the words data quality, but you got to listen for what they're telling you and kind of say like, hey, we've got to solve for that. We can help assist you. So my feeling on that is it's all about the grassroots. You got to sit down with the business. You got to listen to the people and understand their problems and their challenges. How can your organization solve for those and do some stop gaps and fill in the blanks? And then they don't need to know behind the scenes. Like they don't need to know like what kind of custom scanners you built and all this kind of stuff. You just say, this is a business problem. I came in, I solved for this. I think you can do this safely now. And what you said you couldn't once do, you can now do. And I have put the safety bumpers in place for you to be able to activate that. So again, that's that enablement conversation and really flipping the switch to like, that's your challenge. How do I enable you to actually get past that? That would be my biggest kind of recommendation is sit, understand, translate their business problems to data problems. Almost everything is a data problem, if I'm being honest. So translate their business problems to data problems and figure out how you can activate and enable people, and you'll get a lot more buy-in than you think.
Yeah, excellent insights there. Henry?
Yeah, I agree with Amber. Just to add to that, just having an organization that invests in workshops and time to get educated in the field, as well as having the trainings available in their catalog. So if they're encouraged and the CEO or the CDO is invested in that, they are able to promote that culture within an organization. But from my experience, there's always a silo or a breakdown in communication where sometimes IT will take responsibility while the business is isolated. So they have their own technical requirements and technology is doing their own processes without communicating with others. So that is another challenge that organizations face. In addition to no education provided, just focus on getting the data process, and focus on the next project. So that's a little challenge, and data governance would benefit with workshops and opportunities for training within the organization.
Yeah, great points, Henry. We've mentioned a little bit the concept of data silos and how that might be a challenge to data governance across an organization, especially a large organization with maybe many different siloed data infrastructures. So can you guys speak to that? What are some ways to break down those silos to encourage better data governance culture? Henry, why don't you start with that one?
Just bring together all leaders or stakeholders in the meetings and have them talk about their issues, what kind of data they have. So it could be from legal, compliance, marketing. It's just having them be involved in this project and see what aligns, what doesn't align, and what are their priorities. And then each of these organizations will have their own person that will assign a steward to document and map these data that they have in their systems. And then this is where lineage comes. So it's basically teamwork, share responsibility, and make it having that hub where everything's centralized. So not one team member is not inputting these information or migrating. It will be a self-service process that everyone can go in and updates. So they will have the latest information. This is where Databricks or Elation, Calibra will come as a tool to help break that cycle. But that's my view.
Great points, and this is certainly a team sport, bringing in multiple levels of expertise, different stakeholders throughout an organization. So very good points there, Henry. Amber, what do you think there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this ties a lot into the previous question, but I guess what I would just drill home is that I don't think a single message, a broad message to a bunch of folks is ever going to stick or land. They're not going to capture the what's in it for me. And so, you know, I think silos happen organically, like unintentionally, without intention. Like I just think people put their heads down, they start going, and then when you lift your head up, you're like, oh, I left these people out, I left these people out, I left these people out. So you kind of have to like bring them along. And I think Henry talked about legal, compliance, privacy, like all those teams are really, really important. Like I'm in the chief data office, I own data governance, but my key stakeholders that I've identified up front are those security teams, those privacy teams, those legal teams, working with our global privacy and leadership teams. And so it's really important to understand who your stakeholders are here. But I also think like the other thing is like you can't just release a standard message and think that like everyone's going to get it and you're off to the races. You have to collect that buy-in and start to traverse, you know, the different parts of your organization, form a unified message, a unified strategy, something that brings value and comes back to the business and is consumable by them, right? Because again, a lot of this stuff can be a little bit harder to understand, I think, at the end of the day. And I think it's really important that, sure, there's going to be a tool set here that we roll out, we identify data stewards and we train them. And I think that's really, really important. We do that over here as well. And there's been a couple call outs to great tools on this call. And I think those are really critical for the tactical execution of these things. I think the other part is that like getting the buy-in so that those data stewards have time to do what they do and add value, because if it just becomes another thing that they're doing on their list of 20 things to do and their leader's always putting it at the bottom of the stack, it will never actually drive value. So I would just say getting the right folks in the room to explain the value of each piece is really, really important, because then people go, oh, like I have to do that, or yeah, I don't want that to happen, right? So again, like this is all about bringing it to the people and understanding their challenges, and then being able to relay like how your programs come in. But I don't think a single broad message, which I think is sometimes delivered at larger organizations, doesn't stick, right? It's incumbent upon the folks that are in these organizations to kind of like put their feet on the street and get out there and make sure that people are actually understanding the value and the ask and the needs, because it takes a village. I think someone said, hey, everybody's a data steward. Could not agree more. If you touch the data, you are a steward of that data. You are responsible for protecting it, doing best practices, and that's really the culture we're trying to drive, is that like if you're touching it, you're a steward automatically. I don't care if your name's over here assigned to a data source. Like I care that you're touching data, you care about it, and you understand how we need to protect it. So I would say that's the biggest way to kind of drive apart those silos and make sure that you're being inclusive.
Yeah, those are great points. Martins has a question, and he says, how does one transition into data governance and management from an engineering background? What steps should one take, and what certifications should he or she take? And I'll broaden that a little bit more as well, to your last point, Amber. folks within organizations who might find themselves having more data governance responsibilities, whether they have asked for them or not, how do you educate yourself on those? How do you become the in-house expert on data governance and be able to have sort of deputized folks across your organization, to your point about being data stewards more broadly across the organization? Amber, you want to start with that one?
Yeah. I mean, look, I've been with ADP almost 20 years. I started as a data analyst. And the way you show up in your role and the things you care about, I always kind of said, like, our challenges aren't pulling the data and visualizing the data. Like, I have access to it, I can visualize it, I can build you a pretty dashboard. If the dashboard doesn't have valuable insights, like, we're not really driving change or giving you something of value. And so I always anchored myself on, like, what's the value of the data quality going in, and how are the processes upstream, contributing to the quality of the data that's getting in here that I'm working with as a data analyst. So I actually think an analyst or an engineer is well equipped to move into this field, because I myself did. And if you really put the lens on, like, the end user, the people who are working with the data and trying to leverage the data, it's really easy to kind of say, like, when I have bad data or I have data that's not governed well, the value of my product decreases. And so it's easy to kind of wrap your arms around, like, how do I start to work upstream and start to build in best practices and kind of say, like, hey guys, it looks like this isn't working well. Let's talk about why this data looks this way. And people will take notice. And then there's an organic kind of progression, in my opinion, of folks who behave that way as analysts or engineers versus the folks that just come in and there's nothing wrong with it. They're in there, they're coding, they're delivering based on the requirements. Governance and data quality and all those, they require you to look outside of the requirements. They require you to kind of say, like, I care about what this is saying, not particularly like exactly how it's getting there, right? And so and then connecting to the business, because you can't identify data quality issues or governance issues if you're not connected to the business to know how it got there in the first place. So that's the other piece I would highly advise anyone who's an engineer or an analyst is, understand the progression of data from top to bottom. And get in there, dig in with the business, ask them the questions, because that's what data governance is. It's understanding the data lineage, which Henry brought up earlier. It's understanding where it starts, the journey it takes along the path, and how you got the number 5. And it's like, if you don't understand how you got to the number 5 and whether 5 is actually a good high quality number or not, then everything beyond that is not high value. So that would be my, like, biggest recommendation in terms of certifications and stuff like that. Look, I would tell you, go out there and look at the NIST AI RMF, like, study that up. Go out there and look at the ISO certifications. They tell you all about the frameworks and the skill sets you need in order to implement something like that. And where you'll actually, I would say it's actually not easy to find, like, online courses and stuff on data governance. And so a lot of times, we build those internally. And so I would encourage folks too to, like, look internally and your learning programs internally, and develop learning within your own company as well. But they're out there, and you can let the professionals be your guideposts in terms of, like, governance is controls. Like, go out there and see what the frameworks look like, and study up on how to not just know what they are, but understand them. Because a lot of times there's something upstream where you're like, I really need to understand this in order to understand this. That's how you kind of go up and down like, kind of your education path.
Great recommendations there. Henry, anything to add there about recommendations for someone trying to learn about data governance and management, transition into that?
Yeah, Amber just gave me a blast from the past from my work in healthcare. How hospital data comes in, how it's ingested, working with the developers on the logic. So I think it's easier for engineer to pick it up quickly because they have the intuitive sense that I need to analyze the whole workflow, systems, and servers. And then once I have that, I understand if there's a data failure. Oh, I understand why it failed. Let me go and look at it and fix it. But that's the wrong way to do it. Now you have the tools, you can automate that and use AI to detect those issues so it doesn't affect your model. But I wish I had that 10 years ago.
Great points. So the next question we have is how you can audit and monitor AI systems on an ongoing basis, and any practical recommendations there or specific tools that you found useful once you have a data governance framework in place? How do you make sure that you maintain ongoing compliance and trustworthiness? Henry, why don't you start with that one?
Yeah, a good example is Filler AI in conjunction with Google. It monitors your machine learning models, bias, what comes in, what comes out, because essentially when you're working with a model, you don't know what's being fed. But with this process or tools that we have in the market, it's much easier now to integrate. Databricks has the Lakehouse observability tools, ML ops. So it's already integrated for you. You just have to make sure that you program the features, the data, categories, and your dashboard is there. Other than that, it's just a question of, can we train these individuals to use these tools to the best of their use cases? That will require more training.
Absolutely. Amber?
Yeah, I would say start with your definition of AI. Like, are you just Gen AI? Do you just care about, monitoring and auditing just Gen AI, or do you care about, machine learning and predictive models and all of those things, right? So I would say, like, start with your definition, anchor on that. Like, what is AI? What do I need to monitor? I would tell you guys, just hint, hint, the EU AI Act cares about it all. So I would not recommend just going after Gen AI. I think Gen AI made everybody go, whoa, and kind of circle around Gen AI. But like, in reality, anything that's making predictions and is autonomous to some extent is a part of AI, right? Whether it's machine learning or it's generative AI. So get clear on your definition. You have to have a library of your systems and projects. If you don't have a library, you won't have anywhere to kind of base and say, like, okay, these are my projects that do this, and this is how we manage. So this is my predictive library, and how we manage and monitor and audit our predictive library is with these controls. And this is my summarization agents, and so this is how we manage and monitor our summarization agents. So I think you really have to have a solid definition, then you have to have a solid asset library, then you have to say, based on the things that I know that I've collected, all the metadata, telemetry, everything like that, everything that I've collected about each of these systems or use cases, I have to implement X, Y, and Z controls across this foundation. Some may need X and Y, some may need X, Y, and Z, and some may only need X based on how they're classified, how they're classified with the EU AI Act or other programs that you're managing to. So I would just tell you, like, get a clear definition. And then from that point, like, I think we talked about it before, but you can have log monitoring, you can have inline firewall implementation, you can have DLP. I would highly recommend risk tiering to understand, like, your high risk use cases and your lower risk use cases. You don't want to expend as many calories on things that are super low risk and maybe don't actually have a risk to your clients. And then, obviously you need to look at those things that inherently Gen AI may mess up: accuracy, toxicity, bias, those things that really can come to light as a model changes. You have to remember, what you implemented at first can behave very differently in 3 months and can behave very differently in 6 months based on how they are training their models. Again, do not let them train on your data, but, like, however they're training their models and whatever they're doing, I think it's important for you to realize that the behavior over time of these models may change. Having active monitoring and looking for when models start to skew or behave differently is really, really, really important, because it's not a set it and forget it. It's a lifetime of keeping an eye on it and making sure that it's not behaving differently than it did when you first implemented it.
Yeah, those are great points, and leads very nicely into our next question, which is, how can organizations future-proof their data governance framework? So you talked about the potential for models to drift over time, but there's also constantly new use cases, new regulations, changes in law, maybe even different kind of ethical frameworks that are going to be developed over the next few years as AI becomes more and more widespread across various different industries and use cases. So what's the plan for organizations trying to future-proof what they're doing now, trying to create something long-term that is going to withstand the test of time over the next few years? Amber, you want to pick that one up?
Oh, future proof is like, that's impossible, right? But I would tell you, build to the strictest regulations out there. Build a single global program that you can manage and that you can measure. One that can be expanded or customized as needed. But if you start with the strictest, such as those in the EU AI Act or GDPR, if you start with the strictest regulations for data privacy and data security, scale back where it's not required. You can let people, uh, not have to do things where maybe it doesn't apply. Although I would say, why? Might as well just like keep the global program alive. It's going to be very hard for you to put multiple strategies in play, keep up with all of them, measure them differently, and then try to say like, we're good. It's like, just, I don't think it's unreasonable with the strictest policies that are out there and the strictest regulations that are out there. I think we should all be abiding by them personally. So build a single global data program for data governance over AI. Then you won't be playing catch up when, guess what, Colorado drops a new law, or New York City drops a new law, or another country, or somewhere in Australia drops legislation. They're all going to bring legislation, but typically the EU legislation and GDPR is the strongest and is the most restrictive. And if you build to the most restrictive and then dial back as needed, you'll always be ready for what comes around the corner. And it's only when those folks kind of change the game and add additional restrictions do you kind of find yourself kind of pulling the levers of your program and changing it. So that's my best advice is keep everybody as compliant as the strictest rigor that's out there.
Yeah, great points, Amber. Henry?
Just to add to that, I don't have much to add since I come from a tech background, but if implementing within a system, I would recommend just breaking it down by processes, data models, and AI applications. If there's any changes, you can easily, with the flip of the switch, be able to address those within the system. So, but that's all I can say on that.
Yeah, very good points. One question in the chat here, or it's more of a comment from Mohammed that leads into our next question. So he says, governance is a business concern, then an IT concern. Based on that, governance aims to always sustain business outcomes, make AI more actionable, and improve trustworthiness. And we definitely talked about that a bit, framing things as being a positive for your business stakeholders, not being an obstacle, figuring out a way to help them solve their problems in a way that's responsible and gets them high quality data. But if you guys could just speak a bit more on that for a second of how you address various different stakeholder concerns, what some of those concerns are within larger organizations, and about the trustworthiness of AI systems. Henry, you want to start with that one?
So the trustworthiness of, okay, so so right now CEOs are not, they're still learning about the impact of AI and within the organization. So they need educations. They are taught that, okay, we can feed everything into a system, but that's usually not the case. So it requires training, education, and working with them to indicate what does this AI will do for their organization. How can they improve productivity? Would it impact the individual, or would it enhance their productivity? Those are the questions that they do not know. So they are building that process. And based on conversation, they're not there yet. Organizations still are on-prem. They're still learning about data, but organizations such as myself can come in and educate and provide that knowledge of what AI can do for them.
Yeah, great point, Henry. It really takes the education component is very critical to all of this. Amber, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, like, I think you can get ahead of the questions. I think we all have the same questions if we start to think critically about AI and governance and how this all comes together to keep us safe. I think if you can think about data protection, data privacy, like those are critical. Everyone cares about how my data is being used, whether it's with Gen AI or anything else. But Gen AI in particular has exploited some security challenges, and obviously I like to when I kind of bring this to people who aren't quite grasping the concept, because to Henry's point, there's still plenty of business leaders who aren't quite wrapped around like, why am I doing this, or they don't quite understand the nuances between it. But um, when it comes to governance, I typically like to say, like, remember when you got that new computer back in like 1998 and you had like, all the firewall antivirus running in the corner and everyone was so scared and they were scanning it all the time and hitting that button. And it's like, now if you talk to somebody, they're kind of like, I don't even think about viruses anymore, really. Like, I don't even think about that stuff, right? But it took a cultural shift for us to like understand that like we've got to figure out what are the threats, how do we model against these, how do we put the right protections in, and then it becomes the heartbeat, right? And it becomes part of the program, and it just becomes a part of the process, and you can't do AI without governance. I firmly strongly believe that. But I would tell you, like, it's no different than that whole new age of like personal computers and viruses. It's kind of like, oh, okay, now we've got something new interjected into our lives and it's a threat, and how do we manage that? But also personal computers were such an enabler, and they brought about a lot of great things, so people wanted them. So same as AI. And I think it's just striking the balance there. And I think how do you prove that you can do these things? Like, just get ahead of the questions. People are going to want to know, how are you protecting my data? How are you testing this? A lot of the questions here are exactly what clients and associates and everybody else are asking all day, every day. So again, like I think it's really important in terms of like addressing their concerns. Like, bring it to something they know, make it understandable to them, bring it to the table that they're sitting at, meet them where they are is a great way I like to put it. So, and then they can elevate from there, and you can help grow their knowledge from there. But that's be prepared to meet people where they are and understand what that is and understand how to bring them along. It's a key part of strategy and networking and org development. That's just so critical and sometimes missed, and not intentionally, but just people are just like, I'm here, they're there, and I come in to talk to them and I stay up here, or vice versa. Like, right? It's just like, meet people where they are and you'll get a lot more traction.
Yeah, those are great points. And I think the analogy to the antivirus software is well taken. I think what that really speaks to is user experience. I mean, we've improved the user experience around a lot of those things that are now kind of going on in the background. And so I think we'll see the same thing with respect to AI, that some of these things that are now, we're just thinking through these sort of frameworks, the user experience will continue to get better around those, and it won't be as much of a bottleneck as maybe some folks think that it is now. So those are great points. We're nearing the end of our time, so I want to wrap up with our lightning round with your key takeaway about data governance and data management in AI. What's your one phrase or a couple, your key takeaway for the audience today? Amber, why don't you start with that one?
Oh gosh, we've had a long conversation. No, look, like, I think the most important thing is to remember that it's a balance of being an enabler and a protector. And those two things can exist, and you don't have to go slow to comply. And you can move and innovate with safety. And so it's important for you to look at what risks are presented at your business that differentiate from, if you're going to try to consume the whole universe of like, what is risk for AI, you're going to be reading for weeks and probably lost in the sauce, as I like to say. Think about your organization. What's AI to you? Who interacts with AI? What are the systems you're using? All of those kinds of things. Then go reference that material and understand how they think it's best for you. These standards, these global amazing companies that put together standards and certifications that are recognized across the globe. Go look at how they recommend that you mitigate these risks. And then you can start from there. You can build a plan, a framework, a roadmap. And, again, data governance probably exists in most organizations today. AI governance is different. It has a different lens to it. And so take into consideration what the differences are there, why your risk profile looks a little bit different, and then start to use some of the frameworks for AI to plug the gaps, so per se. So that would be my biggest recommendation, is like, take a step back, take a breath, like, think about how you interact with AI, maybe your clients interact with AI, et cetera, and then read some of the key critical, documentations, regulations, certifications, et cetera, and then you can make a roadmap off of that to say, like, we have gaps here, we have risk here, here's how we're going to close them because this is best practice. And I think that will mature your data governance program into an AI and data governance program, which are distinct. So that would be my biggest recommendation and takeaway.
Great points, Amber. Henry will give you the final word.
Yeah, just take stock of the data assets and resources you have in your organization. Try to understand, document, and process all that information, because organizations ultimately need help to transition to AI, but you need to have the base layer already set up with data governance and data management, policies, access, and technology implementations in order to move toward that, what Em described, the AI governance, which is more regulatory, more compliance, and more protecting the data for consumers. So,
great points. Really enjoyed the great discussion today with both of you. So thank you again for joining us. Excellent insights all around. If you missed any of the webinar or want to rewatch anything, the recording will be available just a few minutes after this webinar. If you refresh this page, we'll also be sending out the recording tomorrow, and it will be on our YouTube channel as well. I want to say a special thank you again to Amber, Henry, as well as our partners at Orlando Insight Group and Skyflow for making this webinar possible. And hope all of you have a great afternoon. We'll see you again next time.
take care, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.